3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
You were on mute, weren't
I
you?
was on mute.
Yeah.
My fault. Lock me up. Right. Well, that's my fault. Let's start again. Because this is a lot better now. It sounds a million times better. Right. So why don't you introduce yourself again?
Right. I'm Barrie Cooper. I'm a Middlesbrough councillor who's currently standing to be the next Police and Crime Commissioner for Cleveland.
Do you want to delineate and outline the different roles and responsibilities that a police and crime commissioner would take on?
Right. In charge of the actual operational police force, we've got the Chief Constable, Richard Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
Then we've got the man that provides the money and the scrutiny for the Chief Constable. That's the Police and Crime Commissioner. He's there to be the voice of the people, to get the best deal from the police for the people. Then behind the Police and Crime Commissioner is the scrutiny panel that looks after him. And they look at how he is doing his job, or her, if we had a female officer, PCC. And we're currently on stand down because of the elections, but for the last year or more, I've been part of that PCC scrutiny panel. So I'm well affair with what's going on in the police at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Correct me if you're wrong. Were you the previous PCC for Cleveland Police?
No, I was a member of the scrutiny panel.
Yeah,
that looked after the PCC.
Yeah, who was previously before?
That was Barrie Coppinger.
Right. Yeah.
What happened was the police used to be run by a police authority made up from councillors from the local authorities, and the government decided that had too many political issues. They wanted to move politics out of policing. Mm-hmm. So they created the role of a police and crime commissioner. But what they didn't understand was that they made it too difficult for independents like myself to become police and crime commissioners, because there's an awful lot of money spent on advertising, public relations stuff. I'm doing this on a shoestring. Yeah.
And you're trying to get your message out there. I understand that it was only in 2012 when the police and crime commissioner was announced. Is that right? Or at least the first election was 2012.
That's right. Yeah.
And there's been, unfortunately, there's not a lot of outreach. I believe that there was somewhere in South Wales that didn't even get any elections turned out or any voters turned out in one of their polling stations. Do you find that awareness and exposure to these elections and to something that's quite important, very important for the nation, do you feel as though we aren't getting enough exposure to who the candidates are, what their roles and responsibilities are, and when the elections are?
I think there's a lot of people who don't understand the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and in this area we only get something like 30% turnout for the election. Half of that, I believe, is because we've always had a Labour-controlled council. We've always had a Labour-controlled Police and Crime Commissioner, and in the last elections, a lot of independents like myself became members of the council. So the political spectrum has now changed. And this time there may be more interest, because most people just say, oh, well, it's a done deal. But this time it's not a done deal. There's 4 different candidates for the job this time round, and any one of the 4 could just strike a chord with the people and end up doing the job.
Yeah. And
I hope it's me, of course.
Of course. do you feel as though how do you feel as though outreach has been? I understand that you said that it's been done on a shoestring, and do you feel as though that's an impact on your ability to outreach, especially with COVID and the fact that everything's been done online? how have you taken steps to ensure that your message is getting out there and that you're getting enough publicity that you feel as though you're going to be making that impact that you're wanting to make?
Well, I'm relying on social media, television taking an interest. I do have some leaflets to put out, and they're going to be a last minute thing because, again, it's made difficult. You've got to have an address to put on your leaflets. And obviously, the other three candidates all used their party political addresses. I've had to go out and find a small unit, like a small office, that I can use to go on the leaflets to make sure that the legalities of the leaflets are conformed with. And it's an uphill battle. But the bottom line is, I'm asking people to do two things. Look at the candidates, look at the qualifications, don't look at the rosettes, and vote for whoever you think is the best option for the job. Yeah.
Now, what's your qualifications? What's your background and experience?
Right. Well, obviously, first, I'm not tied down to any party politics. I'm independent. Secondly, I was a police officer for 30 years, starting in Teesside Police and then finishing up in Cleveland because it got changed around. So I've got 30 years experience. During that time, I was also a Royal Military Police Reservist. I helped with the police cadets. I've been in virtually every part of Cleveland Police, in all the different squads, starting from a footbeat officer to a panda driver to a first response officer to the CID to the various different departments within CID, Special Operations Service, and then back down as I was getting older into the local beat office where you walk around and see everybody during the daytime. Come out on nights if you want to, which I did. I spent a lot on nights because I was used to working nights, trying to catch burglars and things like that. And then I retired. And actually, the day I retired, and I think I'm the only one that can honestly say this, I went out and arrested somebody who was wanted. And the chief constable at the time came to see me to sign me off duty for the final time because he'd heard that I'd actually made an arrest on the day that I retired.
Yeah.
I wish I'd been able to keep that pocket book, but I couldn't.
That sounds it sounds like a movie, you know, this this is his last day of retirement. I'm getting too old for this. It's proper sounds like a movie scene. So is this the first time that you've run for PCC, or have you run in the past? Yeah. So what's driven you to? Have you took a look around at Cleveland Police and the operations therein, and have you seen problems, or do you feel as though the current candidate selection, I'm not going to say not fit for purpose, but I'm going to say you feel as though you can do a better job and you feel as though you've got more of a grasp and understanding of the system and how to make a better change? Well,
one of the things I am at the moment is I'm the social secretary for the National Association of Retired Police Officers in Cleveland. And as officers retire, we get to hear the tales about the morale, about the officers have left behind still in the job. And I know that the morale is low. I also know that Richard Lewis is starting to rebuild that morale and that he is a determined chief constable, but he needs the support of a determined PCC behind him. And I believe I am that person because the other three candidates, and this is just a fact of life, they're being promoted by a political party each. There's a Lib Dem, there's a Labour, there's a Conservative. There's no way they can honestly go into the PCC job and not be influenced by their political parties. It just can't happen. And that's the whole point of having a PCC, to get away from the party politics.
So you stand on your own 2 feet, your own principles and ethics, and in these different pillars that you're pushing forward, those, as you say, aren't backed by any political affiliation. Therefore, you're going to go into this unbiased. Now, what are your guiding key principles, and what are the different policy changes or approaches that you'd like to take if you were to be elected into this position?
Well, let's look at the 4 different local authorities. All of them have the same problems. They've all got knife crime, they've all got drugs, they've all got motorcycles that are charging around the estates, on the beaches, on the hills. All of that, they've all got that, but they've also got separate issues. For instance, Hartlepool doesn't have a custody suite, so Hartlepool is sending prisoners from there over to Middlesbrough. That takes about an hour of a police officer's time off the road. I would like to see that reversed. I know it's a financial issue. I know it's going to be difficult, but I think it's something we should look at for the people of Hartlepool. Then we've got Redcar and Cleveland. They've got a big area going out through Gisborne towards Loftus. There's little stations that have been closed. They've got no contact. They just pick up a phone and hope that a police officer is going to turn up. Well, I want to reverse it. I want to get police officers in those little stations, going out on the beat, being able to converse with the local people. I think that would make a big difference, not only in reducing the fear of crime, but actually reducing crime. And I don't want to forget about the farmers either, because I know there's some farms up on the top of Eston Hills, and they feel isolated because I've been up there to have a look. And I want to get some rural officers out and about as well.
Do you feel as though there's been, in my lifetime, I'm only 22, but I do feel as though when I was younger, 8, 9, 10, I did feel as though I seen more police officers and PCSOs out on the streets. Whereas today, it does seem like there's quite a separate boundary between the public and the police. Do you feel as though a merger to some extent of community and being around police officers and sitting and speaking to people and stuff like that is going to be beneficial? Is that a hope for you?
Well, I hope we can restore the police and public relations, because when I was on the force, the people would come and talk to you, and they referred to you as our Bobby, and people like to see you out on the street. They felt comfortable seeing you out there. But now you hear people saying, well, I picked up the phone, I rang 101 and I was on the phone for ages and I was told I was in a queue, and they give up. Whereas if they could walk into a station and say, look, can I see somebody? Well, this is what it's about. It's not an emergency, but I do feel better if someone looks into this for me. Make an appointment. Come back, or we'll send a Bobby to your house when there's a Bobby available. Get to know who your local beat officer is. It's basic policing, and we've got a lot more modern equipment now to do it, but we also need more officers. And the chief has been listening to the scrutiny panel. He has put recruitment into the line. He's already got, I believe, 100 extra officers compared with last year. He's recruiting special constables. He is doing the right thing.
Do you feel as though Cleveland Police is currently understaffed? Do you feel like it's understaffed heavily, or do you feel as though it's under-resourced, or do you think it's a culmination of both?
Well, there's a strange way of funding the police. Now, we have a high murder rate, and a lot of that is in Middlesbrough. But it's people going into A&E where they seem to draw out how much money you need. So the more people are going to A&E, the more money you get to fight violent crime, if it's a crime that's been committed. But unfortunately, when it's a murder, nobody goes to A&E. Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a glitch there, and I want to see that altered. I want the financing of it to be done on how many people we have in the community, how many police officers we have, and I want it to be seen as a straightforward. If you've got 100,000 people, you need X amount of officers to safely police that area. If you got twice the number, then you need twice as many officers, and that to me would make sense.
Yeah, and so if 50 people went to A&E for, getting beat up, for instance, more funding would come as a direct result of that than if somebody went, if somebody was murdered, for instance, and went straight to the mortuary.
That would appear to be a proper analysis, yeah. The way I understand it from the reports I've read,
that doesn't seem
right.
Yeah, that doesn't make much sense. You'd assume that a murder would be worth more in terms of investing back into the police force than an aggravated assault or a battery, for instance. And understanding that now, there's something. I wonder why it's the case. I wonder why they have it set up like that. Do you have any idea?
Well, there is a provision for asking for more money to deal with a major incident.
Mm-hmm.
But that means you've got to have the major incident first, haven't you, before you can claim the money for it. I would rather prevent it. But in order to prevent it, you've got to have the officers out there to do the prevention.
Yeah.
So it seems to me a bit of a catch-22 situation.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Definitely.
So I'd rather than just say, right, we've got massive housing estates coming up here, there and everywhere. The population's increasing. Let's take a look at how many people are in that area. Let's give them X amount of money to cover that policing and try and prevent crimes.
Do you feel as though the prevention of crime is more of a philosophy or more jurisprudence? Do you feel as though crime itself needs to be tackled at its root and tackled from essentially grassroots education, parenting, society and community? Or do you feel as though which comes first? It's like a chicken and an egg. Do you feel as though police officers need to be there to help prevent the crime, stop the crime and enforce punitive measures when the crimes are done? Or do you feel as though it's a lot of changing the paradigms that we sit within, changing attitudes and behaviours socially, which then lead to crimes? Or do you think that it's a merger of both? And if so, how can we tackle that systemically?
Well, I would like to see us starting with the youngsters, the primary school. Let's teach them how to live as part of a community. You don't hear much about the Green Cross Code these days, but the Green Cross Code could stop some child from getting ran over. What's worse for any parent than to have a bobby knocking on the door saying, we have a child in the hospital. Can you come and see if it's your child? That is absolutely horrendous for anybody. So let's start at the very beginning. This is a long-term strategy. We teach the kids not to run out across the roads, not to wander off with strangers, to stay if they're out playing in groups. And we work up from that. We teach them to have reasonable manners, to speak to people the way that they would expect to be taught to. We speak them the difference between right and wrong. If you want sweets, you ask your mum and dad for them. You don't go and walk into the shop and pick some up and walk out with them. Just teach them how to be part of a community, and that will grow up with them.
Do you think that we've lost those sensibilities to some extent?
I think the world's come that busy with various things that we've lost the very basics of being a community. I mean, you're too young for this, but I can remember me nana putting white paint out on the doorstep and having the key hung behind the front door.
Yeah.
The white doorstep was to make it look welcoming. The key was there so that she didn't have to carry it around with her. And the door was only locked when she was out, because the door was always open for the neighbours to pop in for a chat, a cup of tea, whatever. We seem to have lost that now. Everybody is constantly locking the front and back doors when they're at home. Yeah.
Do you think that it's at least I get the impression in retrospect that it's a mixture of consumerism to some extent, the want for more, the want for material, the want to be better and show off, and then social media and the news consistently pushing a negative attitude or, fear mongering, the stuff that sells. And if you're constantly inundated with terrible news and a want to be better than people around you, you not only separate yourself and become an island, but you also separate yourself and become scared of everybody around you. And I think that that's one of the great evils in society at the moment. And I certainly think that, that systemic issue boils a lot deeper than the police, unfortunately. But I think that the police do hold quite a strong branch within communities and the ability for us to feel safe and protected. And there are certainly attitudes towards the police, and they've come up recently and over a few years. Do you feel as though the public as a whole are starting to have a worse and a worse view of the police?
Well, you can't. I think too many people at the moment are comparing British police officers with American police officers who are getting a lot of bad press. We're not America. Yes, we do have armed police officers, but not every police officer carries a gun in the UK. We haven't for ever and ever. So you can't compare the two, and you can't say that police officers are violent towards people. It's just not the same at all.
I sort of get the impression that people see clips and videos online and then they equate that broadly to how the police forces, every system with anything, whether it's doctors, businessmen, anything, you're going to get one or two bad actors. It's unpreventable. It's just the way the world works, unfortunately. And when people have a camera and the ability to record, if they get on tape a bad police officer, then that gets published all over social media. People will equate that one incident to being the broad majority. And I don't agree with that. I genuinely don't. I see it quite a lot, and I see around me, some of my friends think the police are all this or the police are all that, and then that's wrong, because one or two bad actors cannot represent the majority. And I do think that more and more awareness of how much good the police do really needs to be supported, because nobody's going to go out and report on social media I had a good dealing with the police. I really enjoyed speaking with our local beat cop. People don't do that. They want to portray the negative. They want to push that agenda, which is unfortunate. And I think that there's a lot of reversing that we need to do, and a lot of switching that we need to do towards our attitude, so that we feel safe and that we feel comforted and secure within our communities. And do you think that's going to be a challenge? Do you think that's something that could be achieved, and how would you achieve that?
Well, what you've got to think about here is that there are billions of people on this planet, and every single one of them is an individual in their own right. Even identical twins are not identical. They all have their own personal personas. It's impossible to read other people's minds. You've got to take people on how they present to you. And yes, there always will be someone who doesn't play the game, who lets the side down. And police are just the same. But you can't say to everybody, oh, there's one in court, so they're all bad, because we're all different. And that's what we've got to remember. Now, the police officers all take an oath to be fair, to respect people's human rights. And to boil it into a nutshell, they should be treating everybody with the same respect. And the only people who are guilty of anything are those people who a court says are guilty. It's not up to the police. The police just gather the evidence, present the evidence, and the courts make the decisions.
Yeah. And sorry, continue.
No, it's all right. I think that was about it.
Yeah. I do think people don't understand the different branches within UK system. They don't understand that the legislation's the legislation, the judiciary is the judiciary, and the executive's the executive. I think that people conflate and overbear different aspects of the UK legal system, or English and Welsh legal system. And because of that, people assume that one must mean the other, such as you say, the police are just there to collect the evidence, to find the wrongdoer, and to bring them to justice. And, it's the CPS who ultimately decide whether or not it goes to court. And then it's the judges and the magistrates that ultimately are the ones that decide the punitive measures. And I think the people need to understand that process a lot more, and need to understand the steps that go in, because some people think the police will lock you up, and then, they'll be the ones who tell you that you're getting put in prison for a year, and then they just take you straight to prison. And I think that I'm not going to say ignorance, it is, but it's just not being educated well enough. And I think that the more that people are educated on how the system works, and the hundreds of legislations that come out every single year, and how I can't imagine what it must be like to be a police officer and have to deal with all of the legislation and uphold it, black letter law, and make sure that everything's upheld. I can imagine it's quite a tough job. And, you know, I see videos online where a police officer will pull somebody over and they'll pull the phone out and then they'll start mocking and berating the police officer, throwing laws and legislations in the face. And all that does is serve to make the police look a bit silly. And as I say, that has a negative effect on the attitudes. Do you feel as though the current training and the current vetting process that it takes to be a police officer is adequate?
Well, there used to be, I mean, I don't want to sound as though I'm going back too far in time, but there used to be a lot of ex-military police officers joining the regular police when they left the army, because they were big lads and nobody messed with them. Now that we've reduced the height restrictions, they've reduced the age, but you've still got to look at the person and understand what they're saying to you. And if they're saying to you, look, I've stopped you because your car's swerving all over the road and I'm worried that you might be under the influence of drink, then that's why they've stopped you. And then if they say to you, right, the law now says that I should ask you to provide me with a sample of breath. Fine. You end up getting arrested because of that. You go down the police station, they do all the business, but then someone comes along and says, how are you doing? Are you all right? Do you want to have a sit down? Do you want to have a cup of tea? Do you need any help? And there's people who are volunteers go in to the police stations and check to make sure that people are all right. I mean, I had a lad once say to me in the custody office, thank you, I think you saved my life tonight. Because he was thinking of killing himself. He was also thinking of killing me, and he was a big lad and he did have a big knife. But at the end of the day, when he got down to the station, he realised that because I'd give him certain advice about what to do with his knives and put them down and come quietly, he didn't end up getting taken by an armed response officer, because he could have got himself killed. And he actually said to me, two things he said to me: that CS doesn't have to sober you up quick. And thank you, I think you've saved my life tonight.
And do you feel as though those sorts of stories and those sorts of incidents go amiss and people don't look at it like that? People don't see that a lot of police officers are put in life-threatening situations. Sometimes they'll go from paperwork in the office, being on the beat, out driving about, no issues, and then snap. You know, you're dealing with potential life-threatening situations, and just the psychological impact that that's going to have on a person to jump from one extreme to another, that can completely put you into a different mental state. It can make you physiologically, it can make you want to be fast and quick and strong and subdue people and keep things calm and sort everything out quick. They feel as though that de-escalation of their own frights and worries, do you feel as though that's trained properly in the current police force?
Well, it's impossible to know how you're going to respond until you get into that situation. And what a lot of people don't understand is police officers can't take the baggage that they carry home with them. They've got to leave it at the police station, because if you go home full of tears, regrets, it affects your family as well. I mean, I've been retired 18 years, and there's one incident that I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I still have flashbacks to that when I'm asleep, and it gives me nightmares. Yeah. And this is the sort of thing that police officers have to put up with, and it's not easy. So when somebody says to you, oh, you're just a bully in a uniform, you think, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Not a bully in a uniform. I'm somebody that's there trying to look after people, and I'm trained to give first aid, and I'm trained to look after children that are lost and go up on the hills and search for them, and I'm trained to go and knock on somebody's door and say, can I have a quiet word, please? I've got some bad news. People just don't, if they're not in the job, they don't understand. Yeah, it's as simple as that.
It's not just as simple as finding a criminal and arresting them. You know, you're a counsellor, you're the bearer of bad news. You have to deal with death. You have to deal with horrific evils of the world that can, you know, encompass your daily life sometimes. And I've worked as a security guard. I worked as a security guard in York, a York train station. I was on British Transport Police, and I was speaking to one of the guys there, and he said that one of the incidents that struck him was a suicide, and it was on the train tracks, and the guy just, you know, jumped in front of the train, and for about 200 meters up the track there was just parts of him all down the track, and just him telling that story alone was chilling, and it was sobering to know that, you know, not only are police officers getting abuse verbally, and, you know, they're getting spat at or bottles thrown at them or called names in the street, but they also can get called up to incidences which are just beyond approach to some degree, and it is awful. And they have is it TRIM? Is TRIM the trauma counselling that the police officers go through? Is that right, TRIM?
They never had it when I was there. I understand they've got something in place now.
Yeah,
we had a welfare officer, but that was more or less for physical injuries. You could go off and have some physio and that kind of thing. But it's a lot of mental issues now that need to be looked at from trauma.
Do you think that police officers? What years did you serve, Barry? Was I'm guessing
73 to 2003.
73, so 30 years or so. Through those years, as you say, you're the welfare officer, but you didn't have. I'm guessing you didn't have the scaffolding in place to really look after yourself mentally if anything came up. Do you feel as though a lot of officers became traumatized and suffered PTSD and other ancillary effects during your time in the service?
It's a good question, that, and the honest answer is I don't know, because you had to get on with it. People expected you, when you were in that uniform, to be able to deal with everything. I mean, I've changed babies' nappies because I've been told that there's a violent domestic, and I've turned up, and it's not a violent domestic. It's a poor lady that's come out of hospital, having had surgery, and she's on her own with 3 young kids and can't cope. So what do? You can't just leave her in the middle of the night. I changed a baby's nappy, put the baby to sleep, read the 2 kids a story, got them into the pajamas, made her a cup of tea, promised her that social services would be around not to take the children away, but to get some help to come into her on a daily basis the next day. That was a violent domestic that wasn't, and it had a happy ending. Yeah.
Do you feel as though, at least in your experience, how few and far between were these life-threatening or violent activities? Was there a high ratio of boring mundanity, I guess you could say, day to day, dealing with just, you know, general stuff, and then boom, all of a sudden you're into this potentially life-threatening situation? Did you find that happened with you?
Well, that was the problem. You just never knew. I'll just turn this off unless it's something urgent. No, it's all right. I know what that is. You just never knew. I mean, you'd think 6 till 2 in the morning, there's going to be nothing happening. And then all of a sudden something happens. Or you come into the end of a back shift, a 2 till 10. I used to work 6 till 2s nights, 2 till 10s. And you come into the end of your last 2 till 10, and you get a cock and you go up and just check out this. And you walk into a situation where you've got 2 people laid outside with stab wounds. And there's somebody still in the house with a knife. And the ambulance aren't happy about coming to the scene until they know they're safe. And I fully understand that. So what do? What I did is I left my partner giving first aid outside, and I went inside and got the lad with the knife. And then I called the ambulance to come in and see to the patients. You just never know. And that's a lot of the problems. You're all ready to go home and bump.
Yeah. And kind of, I don't know, a little bit controversial question, but do you ever look back on those situations where, you know, in that particular circumstance, and thought to yourself, if I had a gun, things would have been a lot easier? Not even to harm anybody, just for the safety that, you know, that you could have easily have apprehended somebody as opposed to have to deal with them physically in a knife. Do you ever think that, or do you think that it's not in the question at all.
Well, the big cities have the gun problems. I mean, we're starting to get a few now and then, but they're not really the same as the big cities. So I didn't think when I was an officer that I needed a gun. I mean, the truncheon I had was a waste of time. I did actually hit somebody with that because he was trying to stab me with a broken bottle, and it just glanced off his head. It didn't even faze him. But a member of the public came and helped me. A lad that was working nearby, he saw I was struggling. He come and grabbed one of his arms and helped me get him into handcuffs. And that's it. That's what I believe. Police cannot police without the public help. We have to rebuild the relationship between the police and the public.
And do you feel as though nowadays the incentive for a member of the public to come and help a police officer is less likely or less incentivized than how it might have been in the past? Because me personally, I do get the impression that the attitudes towards the police have slowly deteriorated and have become more pernicious, and people don't view the police how they might have 20, 30 years ago. And do you think that that's accurate?
It's difficult to say, isn't it? Because the people that actually do step up don't get any publicity. The people that are on the phones making sarky comments and all the rest of it, there's the ones that you see on Facebook. So it's difficult to say. I think we've still got a reasonable relationship with the police and the public. I do think that some people will step up. We have seen it on the news just lately. Terrorist attack. What happens? And that was in a prisoner rehabilitation place. And prisoners who were getting rehabilitated stepped up to the mark and helped.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've got to look at all different circumstances, haven't you, really?
Yeah. Now, I heard an idea. It was founded in the US system, but the idea was largely that in the US, I think that only 1.4% of all policing activities were violent or like life-threatening. And the idea was this: defund the police. And the idea wasn't to take money from the police, but it was to take money from, essentially set up a police force, kind of like a special forces or a SWAT team in the US that would focus primarily on violent crime and life-threatening crime, and that should be separate to general policing duties, such as maybe burglaries or fraud or traffic offences, and that we should segregate and separate the police. Now, I can understand where they're coming from to some extent. They're saying that all violent and life-threatening crimes should be dealt with by one unit, and those units should be trained and adequately resourced to deal with that. And that's that. And anything else that the police does, domestics and all these other things, should be done separately. And I can understand the sentiment, but in practice, I can't see that working ultimately, because you can't say that a domestic call or a traffic call isn't going to lead into a life-threatening or violent situation. But what would be your take on that sort of structure for policing if it was to approach the UK?
Well, we've already got that, haven't we? I mean, the Americans call it SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics. So they've already got a specialist unit. We've got armed response. But armed response are not going to go out to a violent domestic unless somebody's wielding a samurai sword. If it's just fists and feet, then your local police are going to deal with that. So we don't want to go down the American trail. We don't want to compare ourselves to them. They're a vastly bigger, different country. They have different laws. I mean, where do you see in England people walking around with military-grade weapons? They do over there because they've got a rifle association that says they can, and it's part of their constitution. So comparing us with America, to me, is just, it's not worth it, because we're just not American. We're English, we're British, we're Scottish, we're Welsh. We're different. Yeah,
and I do definitely think that the media Americanizes the UK a lot, and as you say, we do make comparisons to the American system and then make those applications over to the UK. wrongly and inaccurately. So what other key policies or key areas do you feel as though may need reform or change?
Right. We've got a list. I've got a list that I actually put out of things I wanted to do. And that's all about restoring the pride in the police, restoring the responsibilities. I mean, you can talk about protection of life and property, the maintenance of law and order, the prevention and detection of crime, reducing misuse of drugs, preventing domestic violence and helping victims, increasing the constables and the special constables. All these things are in hand at the moment. They're getting done. So I've got to look beyond that. Otherwise, I'm not adding to the package. And one of the things I have looked at is the way that the population is spreading out and things that we're doing to give relaxation to that spreading population. And one of the things we are doing is putting in cycle paths that run along the River Tees and through Stockton and over to Hartlepool and through Redcar and Cleveland. And there's a lot of the areas in them, because I've been trying to plot them all out. There's a lot of areas in them where you just can't get police to very quickly. And where the people out walking, jogging, walking the dogs, taking the kids out on the little trikes and things, cyclists, they're not going to see a police officer. I want to change that. I want to get a couple of electric bikes for each local area, get some uniformed officers on them with an emergency defibrillator and an emergency first aid kit, so that the people out and about can see that there is a police presence. The officers, they're pretty quick, these electric bikes, and they can go for miles. So the officers can get there if there's a call comes in and give people first aid, as well as other things, and prevent crime and be seen and all the rest of it. That is something extra to what's being done at the moment. That's out of the box thinking. And it's just one thing that I'm looking at.
Do you think that the current way that police patrol at the moment, is it largely just in squad cars? Like I say, I don't really see many police officers on foot. It doesn't seem to be as many as you might think that it would be, especially in more hotspot areas like the centre of Middlesbrough Town or up Linthorpe Road. You'll see police cars, you just won't see many police officers on foot. And is there a reason for that? Is it policy? Is it fright? I'm not too sure why it is that.
Well, it won't be fright, because our officers don't run away from things; they go towards them. It's basically that the area is spreading out and the population is going up. And if you have an officer walking down near the Cleveland Centre, for sake of argument, and there's a disturbance in Linthorpe Village, for instance, how are you going to get that officer up there? They've got to be mobile, because the population is spread out so far. And this is the same in every local authority area. That where we were, when we were only little villages, it was great. He had a village constable. He could walk around. He knew everybody. He talked to everybody, and so on and so forth. But now we got bigger populations. We got bigger housing estates. They're spread out all over the place. And it's a sad state of affairs, I know. But you've got to be able to get officers to emergency incidents. Now, when I was in the force, it was 10 minutes. That was a zero priority. If you weren't there in 10 minutes from that call coming in, the boss wanted to know why. Now it's 15 minutes. They've had to put the time up because the community is spread out far and wide. And it's all about safety. It's all about getting officers there where they're needed and when they're needed.
Do you feel as though we have too few officers at the moment to give each officer or pair of officers their own zone to patrol? I don't know enough about it, but in an ideal world, you'd have 2 or whatever police officers going around Linthorpe Village, 2 going around Urson Park, 2 going around the Cleveland Centre, and you'd have them set out and within their own zones, and then you'd have police cars doing general patrols anyways. And that's in an ideal world, and that's with more police officers than I think that we currently have. So having that population accounted for and the spread in the population accounted for, would that just come as an effect of having more police officers on force?
The problem we've got is Cleveland Police covers 4 main local authorities, and those 4 local authorities are spread out far and wide, and we just don't have enough officers, and I don't think we'll ever have enough officers to cover every village, every town, every out of the way place. So we can only do the best we can with what we've got, and when we want extra, we have to ask for extra funding, and then we have to use that funding wisely to get more boots on the ground where they're required. And the other thing we've got to do is make sure that one town, because Cleveland Police is for all the towns within the Cleveland Police area, we've got to make sure that the people in one town don't feel as though they're being left out in the cold. And that's not easy to do. And when you get, as I say, people on the outskirts, like out in Loftus or over on Hartlepool Headland, away from the main stations, they do feel isolated. How are we going to make them feel better? It's not an easy solution. And it's one, if I get elected, I'm going to have to sit down with the chief and try and work out.
Yeah.
But I am determined to work it out and get the best result for the people if they vote for me. And I'm asking them for a leap of faith here, because lots of other people are promising them all sorts. I can't promise them.
Do you get the impression that, do you ever think that maybe Cleveland Police is too, like as you said, too large of a geographical area, and do you think that it would benefit from being broken down into 2 different constituencies, or just 2 different areas instead of one?
Well, each town is classed as its own division. So you would have somebody in charge of that division. You've got somebody in charge of Middlesbrough, you've got someone in charge of Stockton, Hartlepool, Redcar, Cleveland. So they are actually broken down into areas like that. But at the same time, you've got to have each area prepared to back up the other area in the event of a major incident. And they do that. I mean, at one point, they wanted to merge us with Durham. They wanted to make it one force, but it wasn't practical. Can you imagine bringing people all the way down from Durham to Redcar for a pub punch-up? It's just not feasible.
Yeah.
So we're better off staying as we are, as Cleveland, and looking after the people within Cleveland. We've also then got to think about cross-border crime, because criminals are coming across from North Yorkshire, down from Durham. Our criminals are going across borders as well, going out of the Teesside area. So it's a big problem, and it's one that I can't actually give you a positive solution to until I see the whole picture. And I won't see the whole picture because the Chief Constable can't discuss certain things with anybody until they're actually elected to take on those discussions.
Now, do you feel as though what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. That was it. If you had to give me in one word, and we'll divulge it in one word, what do you think's the biggest issue that needs to be faced head on within Cleveland Police?
Politics.
Politics. Do you feel as though
politics?
Do you feel as though it muddies the water way too much?
Well, politics affects everything, doesn't it? Politics is the way you get the funding or lose the funding. Politics, and what you got to remember is that the Police and Crime Commissioner can also dismiss a Chief Constable. And what's happened in the past in Cleveland, there's been so many Chief Constables coming and going. We just can't take that anymore. We need a Chief Constable that's going to stay for the duration, who's going to be working for the people of Cleveland and with the consent of the people of Cleveland. And I am hopeful, in fact, I'm fairly convinced, having met the man a few times, I'm hopeful that Richard Lewis is that man.
Yeah.
And I just hope that whoever gets to be the PCC recognises that and does right by him and the people of Cleveland.
Yeah, do you think too often the case the PCC will have one political affiliation and the Chief Constable will have a different one, and then that can cause contention between the two?
well, no, the chief constable shouldn't have any political affiliation. The police officer should be
Shouldn't.
totally
Yeah.
neutral. He should
But
treat
as you say,
everybody.
yeah,
the
as you
same.
say, politics is, as you say, it's bipartisan, and it can cause those issues, whether or not they should have a political affiliation or not, they still might. And as you say, that's what can muddy the water sometimes, unfortunately. And I do like the fact that you come in as independent and you're not trying to appeal to a certain group of individuals by having a political backing. You come in here without saying, look at me, I'm representing this, or I'm representing that, I'm representing myself, which, is commendable, certainly. But you feel as though that, as you say, in terms of spending and budget, and then in terms of, as you say, like, if people know what Conservatives broadly represent, and people know what Labour broadly represents, the Lib Dems, so because of that, they feel as though you have to go the extra mile to show people what you represent and show how you differ from the more commonly known political arms.
Well, I watch the news like everybody else. And when we see people in the House of Commons fighting and squabbling like children, it just doesn't fill me with confidence. We've got one party shouting sleaze, sleaze, sleaze. We've got another party shouting, what you bullying the landlord for? You're setting a bad example. It just doesn't go well with me. Think of me as Switzerland. Anybody can come in, anybody can go out. I can deal with anybody because I don't have any preset judgments. I'm totally neutral. I'll sit down with any party. I'll sit down with them all. I'll do whatever I can. There's only two things I need. It's got to be legal and it's got to be reasonable. And I'll take on anything, criticism, anything, good ideas, anything. And I will give the credit to whoever comes up with it. I won't say, oh, that's my idea. I'll say, that was so-and-so's idea. And it doesn't matter to me what political party, if they've got any politics, they could be independent as well. But I will do the best I can for the people of Cleveland because that's the job I'm asking for.
Yeah, that's as I say, that's brilliant and commendable. I'm really happy to hear that you're not coming with a political driver, or at least you're not using that as a crutch to try and appeal to people. So it's definitely commendable. I'd like to ask from my own perspective. I do feel as though in Teesside there's some problems that I tend to see. Poverty and drug abuse or addiction, to broadly speak. I do feel as though those are some very heinous attributes that unfortunately get tagged on around here. And when I say addiction, I don't just mean illicit substances. I mean alcohol or fast food or anything, all the vices that a person can consume legally or illegally. And those two, to me, as a citizen, seem to be the most visceral problems that Middlesbrough and Cleveland broadly face. So what is your view on, let's start with drugs or addiction, and what would be your best way to tackle those specific instances?
Well, a lot of people on drugs are vulnerable people. They've got into it. They haven't deliberately gone out and started taking drugs. They've been in a situation somewhere and someone said, here, try this. Are you feeling a bit tired? That'll pick you up. Have some of this. It's free. I don't want anything for it. You just have that. You'll feel smashing. They try it. And the next time they go, here, have some. You're all right. You're fine. Have some. It does you good. It did you good last time. It'll do you good again. And before they know it, they're hooked. And when they're hooked, then all of a sudden, it's not free anymore. It's £5, £10, £15, £20. And they're in over their heads without even knowing about it. And this is how the pushes start. And then people start going on a downward spiral. Half the problem is poverty. Half the problem is that a lot of social clubs and youth clubs have been demolished and not replaced. We've got people out of work. We've got nowhere for them to go, no release. We've got lots of people living in concrete jungles because there's very few green spaces, because people keep building on green spaces. We're trying to get people to stop building on green areas. We want them to build on green grass, brown field. We want them to build on brown field areas. We want everyone to be able to have, instead of a 2 up, 2 down, back to back house where there's nowhere for the kids to play, nowhere safe. We want them to have decent housing, decent gardens, possible tree, because that helps the environment. We want to give them a future to look forward to. If someone knows that we're there to help, to get them back on track, to get them off the drugs, to give them a chance to get their families back, because the families have probably been taken into care because of the drug problems. If we can get them off the drugs, get them into decent accommodation, get them feeling a bit better about themselves, looking to get a job, looking to become part of the community again, looking to get the families back together again when it is safe to do so. I mean, these are goals that we've got to give people. It's not easy. It's always going to be difficult, but at least we're giving them a light at the end of the tunnel to aim for. And that's what I want to see. But I've got to have people supporting that.
I've always thought that addiction is generally caused by the inability to do something, the boredom, the filling of time. You know, if you haven't got something to do and you're looking for a fix, you're looking for a buzz, you're looking for something to perk you up, then they turn to drugs, they turn to alcohol, they turn to something that can fill up the emptiness within a person's life. And you know, I've seen some joke somewhere that said if you're from a small town, the only thing that you can do is drugs because there's nothing else to do. And it's kind of sad, but especially with COVID, unfortunately, it does feel as though there's not a lot to do. You know, I'm so glad that, you know, football is back on. I can go and play goals. I can go for a kickabout with my friends. But, you know, the drinking culture is so strong, and that's not a northeast issue. That's an issue across the whole country, in my opinion. I do certainly feel as though a lot of people just think the best thing that we can do is go for a pint, or we can go for a drink, which is fine in moderation. But I feel as though it's all people want to do every single day is just drink, drink, drink. No one wants to just go to the cinemas or go for a coffee or go for some food. It does feel like it's just drinking, and it's and that can lead to addiction. That can lead to drugs. That can lead to being unhealthy and overweight and getting takeaways. And you know, I don't think that's a problem that the police can solve. Certainly, it's more of a bigger, wider political issue. But I do think that, you know, when we look at people and when we look at people who have problems and who have addictions, we should not look at them at the end where they're committing crimes because they need their fix. We should look at them at the beginning and say, why have they got into these drugs? What has led them down that path? And ultimately, I do think that it is sometimes lack of resources and lack of entertainment and lack of fulfillment.
You're probably right there. If we can get people into things, hobbies, work, and so on and so forth, and get them out of poverty, we might have a chance. But that is a long-term solution, and we are working on it. I mean, I'm a councillor for Newport and Gresham area, and we're putting new houses into that area where the old ones were knocked down. But we're not building 2 up, 2 down, back to front with alley gates on now. We're building decent housing, modern housing. We're hoping to get families in who are going to want to stay and grow back that pride that used to be in that area. We've got some residents that have been there all their lives, and they're lovely people, and they deserve better than what we're currently giving them.
Is this over Diamond Street off Union Street where it's all been knocked down? Yeah. And then they're hoping to build back up Parkhill Care Home. I'm literally, do you know the old General Hospital site next to the old stadium, Anfield? I'm that's where I am right now. I'm not too far, not too far at all. But one thing that I notice is that there is a distinction to be made between this estate, Linthorpe area, and then when you move into the Gresham area, it is noticeably different in terms of quality of housing. Sometimes just the upkeep of the place, it does unfortunately seem to dwindle a little bit, and I think that we need to be honest with that, and we need to ask why. Why is it that the centre of town is kind of one of the bad places of Middlesbrough? If you went to somewhere like London, or you went to somewhere like York, or you went to somewhere like Manchester, the centre is the economic powerhouse. It's where the most expensive rent is. It's where all of the most affluent people live. And then the general outskirts of that is where you tend to see it costs less and less. But in the centre of our town, that's where the cheapest rent is. That's where, the concentrations of crime tend to be. And I've always wondered, why is it reverse in Middlesbrough? I know that hasn't always been like that, but why is it like that now? Do you have any feeling as to why that is, or do you think that I'm wrong? I'm just generally giving that perspective that I see.
It's very difficult when the population moves around so much, and that's where it does in Newport. It moves around a lot. Student accommodation, people coming in who are only looking to stay short periods of time because they don't want to be living 2 up, 2 down, back to back all the time. And so it does. But what about the other towns, the Stocktons, the Hartlepoos, the Redcars? They've all got issues. They've all got different estates where they have problems. And as a police and crime commissioner, I've got to look at all of them and try and find a solution for all of them. And it's not an easy task. And in order to do that, I need to communicate with people like yourself who know the area that they're in, but I need people from the other towns as well. And I'm open to everybody coming and having a discussion, and I'm open to go out and meet all the community groups and all the councillors and try and resolve all the issues that are significant to their point of view and their lifestyle. It's not just about Middlesbrough, unfortunately.
Oh yeah,
it's about
certainly.
everywhere. Yeah.
I just because I live so close, I don't live in Stockton or Redcar or Hartlepool or Mask or anywhere like that, so it's hard to really speak on behalf of them. But I understand that obviously you have to take into account largely all these different areas. So what about poverty? Do you feel as though, so one thing that I think is the case, kind of speaking about how people come in and come out of Middlesbrough or general area, I do feel as though a lot of people, and I am focusing a bit on Middlesbrough, but I do feel as though people who work in Middlesbrough tend to live outside of Middlesbrough, or at least people who are more middle class, working more higher class professions. They might live in Ingleby Barwick or Bishop Auckland or around Durham area. And I feel as though people come into Middlesbrough, work, and then leave. And then it leaves the people who live in the centre of Middlesbrough even jobless or doing more lower economic jobs. And I do think that outsourcing and, not keeping everybody tight-knit in a community, that is a bit of a problem. Do you think that's true to some extent?
I think that's a conversation you need with Andy Preston, to be honest.
I talked to him about a month ago. We had him on an event. We talked a lot about the developments over the old over the border, those old buildings and all the boho startups. But I didn't actually talk to him about this particularly. I'm trying to get him back on the podcast to talk about it. But yeah, I don't want to divulge too much away from policing and into politics and into land development and stuff. So I'll try rewind a little bit back. Do you feel as though, how do you feel about the legalization of cannabis? Now, this is something that's been a hot button debate for quite a long time. And, a lot of people do genuinely think that cannabis is a drug that should be legalized and should be taxed and shouldn't cause the amount of crime that it does through drug trade and salacious encounters with drug dealers, etc., and it should be freely available and in stores and properly regulated. What's your opinion on that?
Well, my personal opinion is that there's some evidence that cannabis use can lead to mental illnesses of one sort or another. And until we know the full facts about that, I don't think we should be legalizing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like opening the floodgate and then suddenly finding out you've made a mistake and you can't close it.
Mm-hmm.
It's better to wait and get the full story, know how high that tide is going to be before you open that floodgate. And I'm no medical expert,
Mm-hmm.
but when there's a possibility, and all I can say to you is many years ago, if someone had a piece of cannabis on them, it was a big incident.
Mm.
But now it seems to be so commonplace. But many years ago, we didn't have as much mental illness around. And that's what I'm concerned about, that this report that I have seen that suggests the two are linked could be right.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I don't really want to go down and say, oh, yeah, let's just do it. Because it could be a drastic mistake.
So then the natural follow from that would be alcohol. Alcohol clearly has mental effects, clearly has physical effects, has a lot of physiological and psychological damages. In retrospect, do you feel as though we should have treated alcohol the same way that we're currently treating cannabis by that same admission?
Well, I don't think I don't think alcohol is as addictive as cannabis could be.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think, I mean, if I go out and I want a pint, I'll have a pint of shandy. Because to me, there's not much difference in the flavour and I don't get drunk. And the only thing I've got to do, though, is I've got to watch the bar person pulling it, because I did have somebody try to give me a lemon top once. And I said, hang on, if I have two of them, I'm going to be near the legal limit on driving. I said, you could lose me my licence. Give me a shandy. And I had to explain to a barman what a shandy was compared to a lemon top. Well, it's life, isn't it?
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from there. If you can know in this country, if you're having a shot of tequila, that's a lot different to having a shandy. Whereas if you're smoking a joint, it could be as strong as a tequila or as weak as a shandy. It's not but isn't that the regulation problem? Isn't that the fact that but then again, you say, well, it's illegal, people shouldn't be getting it. So if you get it and it's unregulated and it does cause problems, then you're liable for doing something that's illicit. Therefore, we can't help you. To some degree, I can understand how that argument would stand up. I just do think that in our society where there's a lot of vice and there's a lot of legal vice, I can go to the shop tomorrow and I can buy 20 fags and a bottle of vodka and 4 sticks of butter and sit in my room and indulge until I'm dead. I can't see how that's okay. And I don't smoke weed, by the way, but I do advocate for it because I do certainly think that me having the liberty to go and smoke a joint if I wanted to doesn't really make much of a difference compared to me, getting the 2 bottles of vodka, 20 fags and a stick of butter and going mental all night. I can't see how we haven't patched this up and said, look, we're not going to be your parents. We're not going to tell you what to do when it comes to this. It's your own body. It's your own intake. It's your own liberty. And you should be allowed to do what you want.
Well, now we're getting down to democracy, aren't we? Because if you want something, then you've got to remember that it's the politicians that put things into place. And if you're not happy with them, you vote for somebody else. But to say, okay, let's legalize this because we don't like the law isn't quite right, because where do you stop? Let's drop the Road Traffic Act because we don't like people getting done for speeding. But then you get people speeding all over and people getting killed by fast-moving vehicles. You get people that say, right, we'll scrap the Misuse of Drugs Act because we want people to be able to have their own human rights and do whatever they want. And all of a sudden, you've got people suffering possibly from mental illness going out committing violent crimes. I just don't want to see us open a door that we might not ever be able to close. I think if we're not happy with the laws of the land, then we need to vote for other people and get the laws changed by the people who are elected by the majority of the country, because it's the majority of the country that makes it democracy, and it's a majority of the country that are going to have to live with the after effects of any mistakes they make.
Yeah, you do feel as though until it's been researched well enough and there is suitable and reputable claims that state that this is not as damaging or is as damaging as the results say, that's when we should maybe look to making a progression, or saying that it's no longer going to be the case. And I am acutely aware that most people generally, if they have possession of a small amount of cannabis in this country, generally speaking, police officers aren't going to arrest them. You might get a slap on the wrist. You're not going to get really, really punitive measures and harsh punishments. Let's be honest. You might get a cannabis caution, but it's not as harsh as something else might. And to sit and worry about whether or not it should be legalized, it's not as if you're going to get thrown in the cells or in the shackles for having a small amount of it anyway. So it is kind of a bit pointless talking about it when there are so many other huge issues going on at the moment. So yeah, I think I can rest on my laurels a little bit with that. And you touched on a bit of an interesting point there when you were speaking about, I was listening to Jonathan Sumption from the Supreme Court. He was discussing why we have certain rules in place and what's the purpose of rules, and it made me think about legal positivism and natural law, and whether or not we believe that morality is prescribed by law or morality precedes the law. So the question would be, in a world of no law and no police, there's no morality. It's Thomas Hobbes, it's the Leviathan, the state and the sovereign need to be there to help enforce laws to keep morality in check. And without that, without the police, without the legislature, without the judiciary, we'd all be savages, and property would be up for grabs. People wouldn't have the right to life or liberty or the right to own anything. And that's one thought, that's one arm of this debate, is that without law, without policing, without any of this stuff, everybody's just a savage and everybody would just take property and not care for one another and not do anything. And then there's the opposite side of the debate, which believes that without Moses and the stone tablets, without the laws, or without any of these institutions of government, people would still generally treat each other well. People would still respect one another. People wouldn't go, steal off people or, take people's land or whatever without justification or need. I personally sit right in the middle of that. I think that some people would be good to one another, be in the community, look after one another, and some people would just take advantage of the fact that there's no law, and it would be that state of nature, as Thomas Hobbes calls it. And what's your impression on that? Do you feel as though law is the enforcer of morality, or morality is the enforcer of law?
I think without laws, we're going back to the days of the Vikings, aren't we? We'd all be setting them bonfires going to warn people that there's this lot coming to take whatever they want. So no, we've got to have properly thought out laws. We've got to have them so that everyone can understand them, and we've got to agree to abide by them. And if we're not happy with the laws of the land, we need to go through the democratic process of electing people who will change those laws.
Yeah, and that's positive 101. I like that. That's plain and simple prescriptive law, and that's how we function in this society. And I do think that having statutes and legislates and different systems of government, which we all have to partake in as a tacitly consented social contract, I do definitely think that that's probably the best way for society to live, because I do not trust half of the people out there with, someone said if you think that communism works, try unlocking your door and letting everybody come into your house for a week and see if you've still got your Xbox. And it just, it makes sense that we do need to protect people and have laws in place. So yeah, I'm just going to quickly run into a couple questions. I've got a friend who had a few questions for you. So these aren't my questions; these are my friends. So he said,
That's all right.
how do you plan to minimise crime whilst avoiding stifling nightlife, given that it is a key industry within Teesside that has already been hit very heavily by COVID?
Well, first of all, why would we want to stifle nightlife? Because that is bringing money into the various towns. It's creating jobs. It's getting us back to a normality. And we do need to get back to a normality. We've had this COVID for far too long. People have been suffering with it. So why would we want to stifle? We would simply ask people to respond in a sensible manner.
Yeah,
and people do. I mean, I've been out and I've seen people sitting sociably distanced outside pubs, away from each other, enjoying a drink, enjoying a meal. Yes, it's a bit cold at the moment; they're being wrapped up, but the people are responding sensibly. And worrying about it, thinking that they're not going to, is sort of jumping the gun a bit.
Yeah, I guess that the question is framed that. There's an assumption that nightlife correlates with crime, and that the more nightlife that you've got, the more crime that you've got, and helping to stop crime inadvertently stifles the nightlife. I think that's what that question was getting at. But if you don't think that nightlife and crime are going hand in hand to some extent, then, as you said, the question can be dismissed without any further cause.
I would never dismiss anybody's question. I think the only problem you might have is if people get drunk and start fighting. But the policing of the public houses is now done by the publicans themselves. You don't have policemen standing or policewomen standing inside public houses policing places. They themselves, it's their property. They decide who they want to let in, who they don't want to let in. Quite often, if they think they're going to have a big crowd, they get doormen in who are trained in restraining people without causing major injuries, and are also trained in first aid and this kind of thing. But I honestly think that there's enough common sense out there for people not to want to get us back into lockdown, not to want to spread anything that might be coming our way, and that they will be so happy just to get back to a sort of normality that they'll behave in a sensible way. And if they don't, then who's to blame?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and certainly I do think that, if things start to open up again and people don't respect the lockdown rules, and then we have to go back into another lockdown, I mean, who else do you have to blame apart from ourselves for not respecting them? That's one of the scariest things that came out last year when we came out of lockdown, is nobody respected the rules and everybody just started piling on top of one another and coughing on one another and concentrating themselves into one area. And of course, we were going to go back into a lockdown. And I'm genuinely terrified about going back into lockdown. It's really, really something that I just don't want to do. I've got so many plans and so much stuff coming up, and I'm bored sat in my room. I just, to be completely honest with you. So, fingers crossed. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or discuss?
No, actually, I think I'm going to have to sort that phone call out.
Well, I really appreciate it, and sincerely thank you for your time, Barry. We're going to make sure to get this podcast out ASAP. You'll actually probably be one of our first podcasts seen online. We have a few recorded, but we're releasing them as a season. But due to the election coming up so soon, May 6th for everybody listening, we're going to try and get that out as soon as possible. But genuinely really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Do you want me to say anything to Steve Turner tomorrow when I speak to him?
No, let him just be himself.
I'll just say hi from Barry. I'm not staring anything. But yeah, again, thank you for your time. I'll end the podcast now. So brilliant. Thank you very much.
All right. Nice meeting you. Bye.
Likewise.
For now.
Bye-bye.